I really never wanted to write this, but my very, very dearest friend on his deathbed, he made me promise to write it and publish it. So I did. I never thought myself to be an author or anything like that, but if we just try our best, that's good enough. And what comes out of it is in the hands of a power beyond our own. As Dr. Clooney said, we were both from the same era, and Pragya Devi also. I was born in 1950, and at 4 years old, my family moved from Chicago to a little suburb named Highland Park in northern Illinois. And it was a very peaceful place, playing in the empty lots, baseball, football, watching television, going to school. But then something happened. I became a teenager. In the 1960s. And suddenly, things didn't make sense the way they used to. I was working a job because my father was having financial struggles when I was 15. And except for a couple of my close friends, everyone else that worked with us were African Americans who were the age of my father. They would come down from the south side of Chicago every day to work. And I loved them. And they loved me. We were really close. But I couldn't understand why. They have no alternative than to live and die in poverty with racial discrimination with no real chance of prosperity or acceptance within society. In a country that promises freedom to everyone, why is the social position of people of America so different from our laws? At the same time, the Vietnam War was raging, and I wasn't such a good student. I knew when I turned 18, I may be drafted and sent to a war. And some of my older friends who didn't believe in the war, they had the choice of either being sent to jail or sent to fight and kill or be killed for something they don't believe. Some of them came back from Vietnam in wooden boxes, killed. Others, due to the emotional stress, they were drug addicts, alcoholics, or they had permanent injuries. How could the idyllic life in Highland Park satisfy me when so much was going on in the world? The music of the 60s very strongly influenced the younger generation to question and to rebel. And like so many others, I joined the counterculture. With a passion, I joined the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. I read the books of Malcolm X. I remember demonstrating in one civil rights march in Florida and having bottles, stones, tomatoes, and curse words hurled at me by my white brothers and sisters. And I remember in 1968 in Grant Park in Chicago, I was just gathered there to talk to people, to find out really what's happening in this world. And I was tear gassed by a whole army of clubs swinging Chicago police, who I was told were protecting my freedom. What's happening? Little by little, I came to know that if I really want to find the answer, I have to find it first in myself. I heard the words, if you do not have an ideal that you're willing to die for, you have nothing really meaningful to live for. And I heard those striking words of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. I was starting to see that the counterculture had the same inner problems as what we were revolting against. There was hatred. There was judgmentalism. So more and more, I started searching for spirituality. I was going to churches and reading the Bible, going to synagogues, reading the Torah, the Kabbalah. I started studying books of Eastern wisdom. And from those very early teenage years, I remember having the conclusion in my own mind that there must be something common in the essence of all of these. How is it that in the name of a one loving God, there is so much division and hatred? Either we reject it all, or we become sectarian, or we really seek the essence. I remember reading the words of Jesus, where he told to some leaders, religious leaders, that you understand the letter of the law, but you do not understand the spirit and the power behind it. I needed to find that. It was about that time that my best lifelong friend Gary called me to someone's house in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And Gary said, I'm going on a summer trip to Europe. You must come. I said, I have no money. I have a job for the summer. I can't. Gary said, I have no money either. But Frank, our friend, is willing to pay for both of us. So let's go. I said, I'll go. It sounded really nice. It sounded like some divine arrangement. So we took an airplane to Iceland, and because there was no volcano at the time, we got a connecting flight to Luxembourg. And then we discovered what kind of trip Frank was going to take us on. The first night, we were all three crammed in a tiny little tent in a campground. And the next morning, Frank was robbed and said, we have to go back. We can't survive with nothing. And he left. And Gary and I just looked at each other and went, it doesn't make any difference to us. So we hitchhiked. We associated with the counterculture. We went to rock festivals. But little by little, there was a call in my heart that was just taking me away from all of it. I found myself sitting on the banks of rivers, in synagogues, in cathedrals, in monasteries, trying to go deeper and deeper to understand who I am. How can I really be an instrument of peace and goodness within this world? this little spark of spiritual desire became like a flame and ultimately took Gary and I to the island of Crete, off the coast of Greece, where we lived in a cave together. And every day from sunrise to sunset, I sat on top of a mountain and meditated and prayed and studied spiritual books. One day, I was weeping. I was praying for direction, when something happened that changed my life forever. I heard 3 words, and I understood if I follow what these 3 words are saying, I could never turn back. Go to India. I had never met an Indian. I had never had Indian food. I didn't know where India was. I didn't have a map, and I couldn't even afford one. I had nothing. I climbed down that mountain back to the cave, and Gary was sitting there in meditation with a little candle burning beside him. I said, Gary, something incredible happened to me. Gary said, something amazing happened to me. I said, what? He said, at sunset, I heard a voice. I said, what did he say? He said, you won't believe me. I really might. He said, I don't think you're going to believe me. I said, just tell me. He said, I heard a voice tell me, go to Israel. I slid closer. I said, what? Where? Where? He said, I told you wouldn't believe me. I said, no, I believe you, but where? He said, I just said. I said, no, I didn't hear. Where? He said, Israel. We should both go to Israel. I said, Gary, he told me to go to India. Gary said, India? There was complete silence for about 20 minutes. I remember looking out at the stars in the darkened sky, glistening over the Mediterranean Sea, and silently whispering into the sky, I am willing. Then I turned to Gary and said, at sunrise, I'm leaving for India. He said, there is no way I'm going to hitchhike across the Middle East. This is insane. It's dangerous. Come to Israel with me, we'll work on a kibbutz, we'll make money, then we'll get a bus to India. I said, Gary, I believe this was the call of God. I have to go at sunrise. He said, you're going to leave me all alone on this island? I didn't reply. He understood my heart. And the next morning I began my journey. My first hitchhiking ride was on a fishing boat from the island to Athens. And I remember looking at the choppy sea, wondering where destiny was going to lead me. We hitchhiked through Turkey and Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I remember when I was in Iran, I remembered that I was supposed to go back to college 2 months ago. And my parents were waiting for me. I told them I was just going on a summer vacation, and they worried a lot. They were so protective. For those of you who are parents, you may sympathize. I was supposed to be back in the end of August. 2 months, 3 months. Now, it's the end of October. They heard nothing from me. Then they got a letter telling that Gary's no longer with me. I've seen life through the eyes of a Western man for 19 years. Now I want to see through the window of the vision of people of the East. What education could be better than this? Personal experience. I thought they'd be so proud of me. I said, I'm hitchhiking to India. I knew I was breaking their hearts. And then I ended the letter with words that I'm sure fell on totally deaf ears. Please do not worry. It was postmarked Iran with no return address. I remember when I was in a place called Kandahar, Afghanistan. I was sitting in a little tea stall. Interestingly, myself and almost every world traveler in that counterculture of world travelers who had no money in those days, we all really loved the people of Afghanistan. They were so hospitable and so kind, although so poor materially. I was sitting in a little shack that was a tea shop. There was no chairs. Everyone was squatted down with a little glass of tea. Maybe 5 of us, 6 of us. And then this boy came in. He was about 16 years old. He was in total poverty. He was wearing filthy rags on his body, very much torn up. He was extremely skinny and looked really malnutritioned. But the worst part is he was blind. His eyes were swollen, disfigured, and had nothing covering them. I never saw anything like that. My heart quaked. And he had a little tree branch that he was holding, and there was a tin can nailed to one end, and then a string, a wire, not a wire, that was stretched across and nailed to the other end. And he played it as a musical instrument. It wasn't very acoustically professional. It was just like bum, bum, bum. And as he played, he sang these hymns that were just pouring from the core of his heart. And as I was looking at him, I saw his face literally was illuminated with joy. There was a smile with his rotten teeth inside. That was perhaps the most blissful smile I ever saw. We all sat there mesmerized for about 45 minutes as he sang and he sang and he sang. And I remember thinking at that time, he looks like the happiest person I've ever met in my life. And yet he's in total poverty, he's in disease, he's illiterate. Everything that I have been taught my whole life will make you happy, he has none of it, and he's happier than all the people who have it. This was a culture shock to me. What really is meaningful and fulfilling life? Is it about things? Or is it about an inner experience? That was a great lesson. It took me 6 months hitchhiking from London to the border of India. And when I got to the border, they wouldn't let me in because I had no money. That was really a struggle. You have to read the book if you want to know how I got in.